Thank you for coming. Good afternoon. I'm Christina Johnson from Door County Library, and I'm the branch manager at the Sister Bay Liberty Grove Library. I'm also a member of the Door County Reads Committee, part of this series for 2024. This year's book, as many of you know, is Braiding Sweetgrass for Young Adults. It's been widely shared throughout the community and our schools. And our series of related events is focused with First Nation speakers and continues throughout all of February. Today's event, Reciprocal Restoration at Wequiock Creek, is provided by Stephanie Dodge. Thank you to everyone sharing this afternoon with us. And we do have a watch party location at Sturgeon Bay Library. Hey guys. And we're in person here at the Ridges Sanctuary in Bailey's Harbor, Wisconsin, along with Gibraltar's Ecology Club has joined us today. Woo! Talk about epic field trips, you guys rocking it. And then for those of you joining us online from home, thank you for being with us. We do ask anybody that's going through Zoom that during the presentation you remain muted unless prompted by myself or Stephanie. And for those of you online, if you can use the chat box to put comments or questions. We can't promise, but we'll try to cover each question, and we thank you for your participation. So a note that this event is funded in part by a grant from the Wisconsin Humanities with funds from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the state of Wisconsin. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this project do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And I'd like to hand it over to Anna Foster, the program director here at the Ridges, for a minute.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. Welcome everybody, and welcome everybody coming in virtually. Just to give you a little background about the Ridges, I know some of you are very familiar with us and some joining online might not be as familiar. We're a private nonprofit nature sanctuary. We were founded in 1937 as Wisconsin's first land trust. Today we protect over 1,600 acres, including some ridge and swale habitat. We also protect over 475 vascular plant species, including 29 species of native orchids here in the sanctuary. Our mission is to promote positive environmental behaviors through impactful educational experiences, land management and protection, and ecological research. Every day, our staff members and volunteers and visitors ensure that we incorporate our mission into everything that we do. I also like to share our land acknowledgement with you all today. The Ridges Sanctuary is located in Bailey's Harbor and Jacksonport, Wisconsin. As part of the Greater Door Peninsula and Green Bay Basin, we recognize these lands as the lands of the Menominee, Potawatomi, Ottawa, Sauk, Ojibwe, Petun, and Huron peoples. As the stewards of the Ridges Sanctuary, we will continue to learn the history and present realities of Indigenous peoples with connections to this land and educate each other about them. And then I'll hand it back to Christina.
Okay. And similarly, from the libraries, we would also like to recognize the land here, as well as across the region where our 8 library branches are and our event locations for Door County Reads. So Door County Reads Committee acknowledges the original peoples and primary caretakers of this peninsula from time immemorial: the Potawatomi, Menominee, Ho-Chunk, Odawa, Ojibwe, Petun, Huron, and Sauk peoples. The land we stand on today is part of the ancestral and historical homelands of each of these nations. We pay respect to these roots and connections and traditional ecological knowledge that is present and vital today. May we appreciate those who came before us and commit to partnering with and learning from First Nations today and into the future. We are honored to share this time together. Our speaker today is Stephanie Dodge, a dear longtime friend of mine and a sister for nearly 2 decades. Going back to our days as university students, American Indian Studies program co-workers, Ojibwe language learners, and friends at UW-Madison and beyond ever since. Stephanie is from the Menominee Reservation in Wisconsin, where she was born and raised as an adopted Menominee descendant and is a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. She was raised under the traditional structure of Menominee and other Big Drum communities. In her adult years, she moved to Oneida, Wisconsin to raise her children under the Oneida Longhouse tradition, of which they too are enrolled members of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. Her family consists of a beautiful blend of religions and races that has allowed her to grow into a woman of understanding, compassion, and consideration for all people. Using her skills, education, and experience, she has created a training and consulting business, Fair Women LLC, which offers the transfer of her knowledge as a First Nations woman advising on First Nations topics. Stephanie specializes in sustainable development and reciprocal restoration. Over the years, along with multiple degrees, she has gained educational, personal, and professional experience in higher education advising, curriculum design specifically to First Nations culture and language, sustainable development, reciprocal restoration, First Nations studies, youth mentoring, nonprofit work, community education, historic generational trauma, and other areas of specialty. Growing up, Stephanie was raised under the influence of leaders and activists that inspired her to pursue opportunities in various pathways that serve the purpose of giving back to First Nations people, her family, community, and all of creation to educate about restoring balance. In a full circle side note, she is actually wearing some braided sweetgrass earrings today, and there's sweetgrass actually in them, real sweetgrass. That is actually on all of our brochures and marketing here. It's the same patch of sweetgrass. And Leah Lapointe from Red Cliff, Wisconsin. This is her photograph that you see in all of our marketing for this series. And so that sweetgrass is actually present with us today in Stephanie's earrings. They were beaded by her and woven actually just this fall. So we want to thank Leah for that very much. And in addition to today's presentation here at the Ridges on reciprocal restoration with Wequiock Creek, Stephanie is also presenting on Thursday, February 8th at the Crest Pavilion in Egg Harbor on baskets of knowledge in relationship to the knowledge that is shared in the process of making black ash baskets. Oh, sorry. And we have flyers over at the table over there if anybody wants for that. And then she was also our discussion moderator last week with author and scientist Robin Wall-Kimmerer. The recording is available on our website through this Friday. So if anybody still wanted to catch that, we do have QR codes that you can pick up, and it's also on our Door County Library website. So with that, Stephanie, thank you. Thank
you, Christina. Thank you everyone for coming. Hello, my name is Stephanie Dodge. I also go by Yogogwali, which is my given name in Oneida, and Awashuki in Menominee. They both mean bear woman. I'm a member of the Bear Clan. And as Christina mentioned, I grew up on Menominee Reservation and then spent some time on Oneida Reservation too. So thank you all. And I just want to clarify a little bit on Thursday. I'm not sharing knowledge about how to make traditional black ash baskets because I don't have that gift or skill yet. There's a picture on the flyer of me pounding logs, and I was learning how to strip a black ash tree to make the materials for black ash baskets, but I haven't gotten that far in the process of actually making a basket. I've just pounded the logs. This is a really long process to learn making baskets. And so I haven't had the time to do that, but the metaphor for the talk is called baskets of knowledge, and it's focusing on transfer of knowledge and foundational teachings with traditional ecological knowledge and what that means. And when Robin talks about finding balance, things like that will kind of be the highlight of that talk. So I just wanted to give that little bit of clarification because basket makers are super impressive and artistic and creative people and have beautiful gifts. And unfortunately, I'm not as gifted in that area, but so I just wanted to provide that clarity. And then today we'll be talking about reciprocal restoration at the Wequiock Creek Natural Area. And this is something that I embarked on while I was a student at UWGB in the First Nation Studies doctorate program. And so there was a position created in the Cofrin Center for Biodiversity with UWC grant. So they're two separate agencies type. And so this was a shared position that focused on a couple of different projects in the area around Wequiock Creek Natural Area. And so I'll explain more of that and what that entailed. But first, I just want to open up with a quote from Robin Kimmerer, who it says our session expired on Zoom. Please sign in. Am I good?
You're still on this side.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
I think you're still good.
Okay, okay. Sorry, there's a box popped up. Okay, so, this quote that, I'll be sharing is from a chapter in Traditional Ecological Knowledge. It's a book written by Melissa Nelson and Dan Schilling. And in this chapter, she, writes about restoring reciprocity with the good green earth. And so in the beginning, she says, through the lens of traditional Indigenous philosophy, the living world is understood not as a collection of exploitable resources, but as a set of relationships and responsibilities. We inhabit a landscape of gifts peopled by non-human relatives, the sovereign beings who sustain us, including the plants. And so I wanted to open up with this quote to kind of give you a foundation of what reciprocal restoration entails. When you think of reciprocity with restoration, you may think of giving back to the environment or giving back to that land in a certain way. However, it can be broader than that. There's a plethora of relationships out in our natural area, and it's also honoring the relationships that those beings share with each other too. It's not just reciprocal between us, but it's recognizing and honoring their relationships with each other as well. And so I wanted to just kind of open with that understanding as they are also sovereign beings of this area, which she entails in that quote. And so, let's move to the next slide. All right. So jumping into Wequiock Creek, here's a picture of the creek. The majority of Wequiock Creek natural area is a flat upland. It's dotted with a few wetlands, and it has a steep sloping forested riparian area that slopes down to the Wequiock Creek. There's an intact floodplain and wetlands located along the naturally meandering creek. And this creek is also really important to the wetlands that are around Point Asable, as this creek runs right into Point Asable. This thing keeps beeping. The area that you see here, this forested area is dominated by green ash, American elm, basswood, box elder, black maple, and other hardwoods. So just to kind of give you an idea of some of this area, and then in the springtime, there's a lot of springy ephemerals that are the first vital food source for a lot of our insects and animal life that start to migrate or come out of their dwellings during the springtime. And so right now, it's kind of a funky time in our climate area. It's getting a lot faster than it should be. Things are starting to sprout maybe too early. So it'll be interesting to see how plant life and how animal life continues to adapt to climate change. And what I think is beautiful about Wequiock Creek is there's a number of different ecological sites or, various sites that we can track different types of wildlife and insects live. And so here's a satellite shot of the Wequiock Creek natural area. And so there's two fields, there's the north field and the south end field. And then in between it is this forest area, and that's where the Wequiock Creek area runs through, and then you can see it drains into Point Asable wetlands. Excuse me, I woke up with a tickle in my throat, and it's just been a day. Um, The 76-acre Wequiock Creek area was acquired during 2019 through a partnership with Northeast Wisconsin Land Trust and the University of Wisconsin Green Bay and the town of Scott. I like to call this the creation story of the Wequiock Creek Natural Area. It's a really beautiful backstory of how individuals came together and really worked to try and acquire funding and to preserve this 76-acre natural area that was slated for development. This was originally supposed to be housing, you know, really nice, like how it looks on the rest of Nicolay Drive as you're driving down. And so when you think of the Wequiock Creek Natural Area, you may automatically go to the Wequiock Falls, which is further north, but this is down more on the Nicolay Drive, kind of adjacent of Point of Sable. And so this whole area was slated for development. However, there were a handful of people that really wanted to preserve and really saw the value of this section of the area and wanted to make sure that this was able to be something that future generations could come and enjoy like they have been able to. And so there's a number of individuals and agencies involved that have been able to create this Wequiock Creek Natural Area and have participated in the restoration efforts up to this point. And so when I started in this position, it was during COVID and everything was taking place online. We couldn't meet in person per se. And so like I mentioned, I had a few different tasks that I was challenged with for that First Nations student graduate assistant position. That's what my title was. And so one was creating a partnership with 4 surrounding First Nations, Menominee, Ho-Chunk, Oneida, and Potawatomi. And then the other was providing educational outreach efforts and resources about Wequiock Creek Natural Area and the restoration efforts, but then also highlighting the cultural significance and the historical significance of our First Nations in the area. And so, excuse me being the first one ever in this position, I had a lot to work with and a lot to figure out and create some opportunities for our First Nations to share in this project. And so a little bit more about some of the restoration. Since 2019, there has been conversion of the south end field into grasslands that used to be farmed, and that has since been converted into grassland community, which is the starting stage for an oak savanna. And there has been some oak trees planted there already. There has been a wetland created kind of right where the ridge word is. Excuse me, there is a wetland created there. And then in the north field, there's already some natural wetlands that you can see from the satellite image. Those have been burned and dug a little bit so that they can hold water longer into the spring season. And there's also been a number of pollinator patches planted in the area as well. And so here's another picture of some of the wooded area. This is a picture that goes up towards the north end field. And in addition to all of the wetland work and the grass work that they have done, biodiversity staff, students, and volunteers have planted over 5,000 trees and shrubs in this area. And so there's been a lot of really great restoration work that has already taken place under the supervision of Biodiversity Center and students that have been involved. And so for the educational outreach piece, I really wanted to incorporate traditional ecological ways of cataloging or classifying species. And so what I came across during my research was this idea called a kinship cluster. And I found this from a Cascadia field guide where local experts, poets, and artists are working to create a literary field guide that focuses on the Cascadia bioregion. And this guide uses kinship clusters as a form of their classification rather than Western taxonomy. Ernestine Hayes, who's a Klinglet professor and author in Juno, recommended using this Indigenous way of categorizing the field guide rather than the Western taxonomy. Typically, the Western scientific method divides insects or divides things into insects, birds, categories, things like that. Whereas this idea of a kinship cluster would take groups of 7 to 10 species that share a relationship with each other and rely on each other to survive. And so it's looking at kind of like tiny ecosystems in a greater area. And so this is one example of a submission by an artist who put together a kinship cluster of pines. And so this is one example of the submission for the Cascadia guide. Another example that I am presenting here are looking at the pollinators and their species and the relationships that they have in the area. And so does anybody want to guess what these two bees are? Any guesses?
Bumblebee.
Bumblebee? Close. Is a more specific type of bumblebee. So the one on the yellow flower is a red belted bumblebee, and then on the purple bergamot would be the brown belted bumblebee. There are a lot of variations in bees, and I did not know this until I started my position with biodiversity. The rusty patch bumblebee is also something that's very significant, and you can find all of these now in our pollinator patches. Excuse me. And so this is one example of a kinship cluster that could be available in that field guide, recognizing the variation in the bee species, along with the variation of plant life that they sustain through their pollination. And then you could take it a step further. Okay, and so here's another example of some kinship clusters that you may find out at the Wequiock Creek area. Anybody want to guess what this insect is? Go ahead. Dragonfly, yes. So we have a dragonfly feeding on, I believe, cedar, that looks like to me. And then I'm completely stumped because I know nothing about mushrooms. So here's just another example of a kinship cluster. I'm not sure what kind of mushroom that is and what the relationship is with the tree, but this is another example of a kinship cluster that could be available on that field guide to give people more understanding of the interrelationships of species out in our wildlife. And so that was one project that I worked on, was encouraging staff and students to start looking at classifying species out there in kinship cluster forms rather than using the Western taxonomy type of form. All right, so let me take one more drink. As I mentioned, the other part of my position as First Nation student graduate was to form partnerships with the 4 surrounding nations, Menominee, Ho-Chunk, Potawatomi, and Oneida. And as I started to do more research and put more thought into this, it came to realization that Menominee and Ho-Chunk nations have a really strong, highly significant connection to this area. Menominee Nation's creation story actually takes place just up the bay at the mouth of the Menominee River. And then Ho-Chunk's creation story, they say, actually takes place right where the Wequiock Creek natural area is, what is also referred to as Red Banks, or in their language, they call it Mokospooch. And so when that fact became known to me, then I really wanted to honor and recognize the significance of that for those 2 nations, and give each nation the opportunity to come and honor and to repay their respects to that area and that land in their own way. Excuse me. And so what is so significant about a creation story? Why does that make such a difference in wanting to create a partnership with these nations? And again, pulling from a quote out of Kimmer's chapter in Traditional Ecological Knowledge, she says, "Creation stories offer us a metaphoric glimpse of the principles that guide interactions of traditional Indigenous peoples with the natural world." And so what she's saying is that our creation stories are a foundational teaching tool for our people. And within our creation stories are a lot of the basis of how we perceive the world and how we come to understand Mother Earth, and how we come to understand the gifts that were given to us to sustain our life on this earth. And so through understanding and belief, if you have true belief of your creation story, then you tend to perceive the world in a different way. It's not something that you just live on, it's something that you live with. And this journey on this earth comes with responsibilities that you have, that you give back to Mother Earth, as she has provided sustenance for you. Then we in turn have responsibilities to honor those gifts that were given to us. And so that's where that reciprocation piece comes into play, when you think about traditional ecological knowledge, and then taking that a step further into restoration. And so as I considered how to pull all the nations together, in addition with all the different partnering agencies and stakeholders that had already invested in preserving the Wequiock Creek natural area during COVID, when we're restricted on gathering, I decided to, instead of having a meeting, I decided to host a tobacco blessing at the Wequiock site, and invite each First Nation to come out and offer them tobacco, and they could offer their own blessing. They could say their own words on behalf of their nation on what this area means to them. In addition, it was a great opportunity for all the other stakeholders and partners to come together and also share their intention and love and hopes and dreams for this area. And so it started, this year will be the 4th year coming up in May. And so the first year it was a really small gathering with just kind of the key people involved. I would say there's about 20 or 30 of us there total. And then each year it has grown bigger and bigger. And so the following year, we were able to have students from Menominee Indian High School come down and attend and do an archaeological dig. And then we had students from Oneida Nation High School come and present and do some singing. And so there's a picture of us with both the Menominee and Oneida High School students and their teachers. And they had so much fun that day, just being out in nature and learning about archaeology. And then after the tobacco blessing, they were able to plant some of those 5,000 trees that I mentioned. So they had a lot of fun, and the teachers had a hard time pulling them out of there to get back to school in time to catch their bus home. So it was just really great to see the engagement between the students and this place, and to learn more about the history, learn more about their ancestors, and the movements that had taken place pre-colonial time, learn more about settlements, learn more about interaction between different nations. This is a shared territory for Menominee and Ho-Chunk for thousands of years. And so it was really highlighting for these students what this area means to them and their ancestors. And so here's a picture of us out on Point Au Sable with some of the findings. Students found various pieces of metal, a lot of shells, things like that. But we had a really great time. And so here's another picture of us gathered at the Wequiock Creek Natural Area Site. We try and gather in a circle. And we have tobacco available for not just the speakers, but then everyone is available to grab some tobacco and put it out in their own way. Practice a little bit of that honorable harvest that Robin Kimmer talks about in her book. And so when you go out there and ask for permission, that was some of the intent of this tobacco blessing is, okay, we're getting into the springtime, and we're gonna start digging in the dirt. We're gonna start disrupting that land. And so it was important, in addition to having nations speak on behalf of what this land is, but also speak on behalf of the work that we're going to do. And so this was also a way for us to ask permission from this land, from this area, on this is what we're going to do, this is our intent. And so this had multiple intentions with it. And so that's an element of that reciprocity in asking for permission before you go out and just start disrupting the earth. So that was also a key component of this. Here's a picture from last year's event. Again, it grew bigger. And so last year we were able to also bring in Potawatomi youth singers, and they brought their drum and they performed honor and travel songs for us. And so here's another picture of them. They didn't have enough chairs, so they just grabbed some stumps and made it work, which is beautiful. But the growth of this event has been just really beautiful to see. Now, there's now members from each nation attending the tobacco blessing every year. There's more intention coming. It's growing to be intergenerational as these youth are able to come in, learn more, leave their marking, whether it's putting that energy out to the land vocally by singing or physically planting a tree. This is something they can carry with them for the rest of their lives and return to this site and share with their own children in the future. And so again, this is part of that creating relationships and building reciprocity with our First Nations and also giving back to creation. In addition, we were able to collaborate with a student at UW-Madison who was participating in what was called the Flow Art Project, I believe. Excuse me. And she created a tobacco pouch for the Cofrin Center of Biodiversity. And this is a pouch that the Cofrin Center keeps, where they are able to then use it anytime they need. If they ever need to ask permission, they can put out that tobacco themselves, or at the tobacco blessing, of course, they always bring the tobacco pouch and it has tobacco in there too. And so the artist, Ava, she had a lot of fun with this project. She went out and sourced the materials to hand dye the cloth, and then she beaded a rusty patch bumblebee on there, and then on the other side she beaded the outlining of the Wequiock Creek at the natural area. And so this is an example of some of the artwork that can come out of these, can come out of this restoration work that also tells a story about the area. And again, that's another example of relationship and reciprocity that was built through this tobacco blessing. And now this is something the Cofrin Center has forever. And so that's just another really beautiful element that has came out of the tobacco blessing and this element for trying to build partnerships and trusting relationships with First Nations. And so I'm gonna close with some verbiage off the Wequiock Creek Natural Area website, and it says, the long-term goal is to establish a natural mosaic of Midwestern oak savanna, riparian woodland, and shallow wetlands, together supporting rich native biodiversity and a landscape representative of the region's unique cultural history. An additional goal is to inform visitors about biodiversity conservation, watershed protection, and the important heritage of Indigenous people who helped shape this environment. And so lastly, I just put on a cover of the book, if you're interested, and then a link to the First Nations Stories, PBS Voices for First Nations page. I encourage you to go check that out because each nation's creation story is on there and their history is on there. I didn't feel comfortable sharing the nation's creation stories as far as like Menominee and Ho-Chunk go, but I really encourage you to go to that website and watch it for yourself, because then you get a stronger grasp of what this area means to each of those nations. Of course, Oneida and Potawatomi, those are nations that relocated or moved in throughout different times in history. But their creation stories take place in different parts of, Turtle Island, as we call North America. But I just wanted to highlight that difference between those nations. So I really encourage you to go check out First Nation Stories, Voices for First Nations on the PBS page too as well. And that's the end of mine. So if you have any questions, I'll open it up for that. Any questions? Yeah.
Are there some attempts to go upstream of that area on the Wequiock Creek? I know it extended quite a ways into the hills there. Are there any other projects? I know there's also that big, I forget the name of the natural area that's recently been established more up on the hills.
There was mention, at one point of hopefully preserving this whole area. But I don't know. Just to get the 76 acres took so many stakeholders and shareholders to raise the funding and then to work with UWGB to establish long-term preservation. There's a lot of hoops you gotta jump through with Wisconsin DNR, and then there's a whole archaeological component to it, that is just, it could be mind-boggling, I would say. But yeah, the goal would be to preserve as much of that as possible.
It does my heart so much good. We used to live in Puerto Sabo on Agamite Road.
Okay, yeah.
And those little cottages there. And
Yeah,
I always thought, what a beautiful place. I hope it doesn't just get socked in with condos.
Yes, slated for development, right? Nope, that was really what drove the forest to try and preserve this area. They did not want that for this unique there's unique wetlands, there's unique watersheds in this area. It's just such a unique type of environment. I really encourage people to check it out if you can. And it's just off of Nicolay Drive, Circle, Ridges Road, Wequiock Creek Natural Area. Yeah.
What kind of field did you go into, like, with college and everything? I kind of curious too.
Good question. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I always knew that I wanted to work back in my community, back with my on the reservation or with First Nations people. I started undergrad with community education. It was at that time family, consumer, and community education at the School of Human Ecology, but they changed that degree since then. And then I got my master's in adult education, and then I went for my doctorate in First Nations education. I also have an associate's in sustainable development, so I have a little bit of everything. But somehow it pulls together.
Thanks.
Yeah, sorry. Huh? Yeah.
Are there any tribe members that live on the reserves?
So where Wequiock Creek Natural Areas is not, that's not trust land and that's not First Nations land. That has all been, what would you say? In the allotment, it was all slated for allotment for settlements. And so, no, that area is not. But there are Native people that live all around the area. Actually, more Native people live off our reservations than on our reservations. So there's a pretty good population of various Native people in Green Bay and around the area. Yeah.
Are you connected with a little center that's on Benderville Road? The Warriors, ecology warriors.
Not that I'm familiar
It's
with.
close to the site that is supposedly where Nicolay landed, which is also probably the site of the stockade that Ho-Chunk
Okay.
claimed as their original
Mhm.
origin story.
I'm not
But that's
familiar with that.
Benderville, it's just north of there. It's, I don't know why they call it Benderville, it's really more of what is called Red Banks.
Yeah,
So,
yep.
but I thought maybe they could connect it with your efforts there.
They
It's a
may
good
be
collaboration.
to a degree.
It's on the Google
not-
Maps, that's the
yeah.
only way I know.
Okay,
I
yeah.
was surprised to find it
Any questions online?
Nope, nothing online.
Anybody else have anything yet? Especially from the students or the teachers? Yeah.
So when does the, like the tobacco ritual or, like, I forget what it's.
The tobacco blessing?
The blessing, yeah, when does that happen, like what time of year?
Okay, yep, good question. The tobacco blessing usually takes place, the first 2 weeks of May. Early May is when they try and schedule that. It's in the spring. They haven't set the date for the tobacco blessing yet this year, or I would be slamming that all over. But as soon as I know, I can get that shared out with Christina. She can share that out to the Door County Library
Is it
events.
something
things like
that they could come to? or-
Yeah, it's usually open to the community. Now that we're not in COVID anymore.
Yeah.
What does it take to like protect a piece of land that's maybe going into development or is already developed to like, I don't know, restore it?
So before I came onto the project, that had already been about a 10-year process. There was a gentleman from the town of Scott that really, I think he started with a petition to just get community members. And then I think he started with his town of Scott, and then it built from there, growing into more agencies. It's not easy to preserve and protect a piece of land or a wetland, or wild rice per se, as like, I know a lot of, First Nations people are doing water walks right now. You may have heard of those, where people are walking for the water, to try and preserve and protect our water systems. There's lots of different efforts and ways to go about it though. Yeah.
Have you had any contact with the Potawatomi community in Upper Michigan in Delta County?
We didn't go that far. We're working with Forest County Potawatomi, just to, kind of stay close to this region, just for the sake of time and, resources.
Right, and
Yeah.
they are the descendants of the Potawatomi that lived in Dora and Kewaunee County.
Right.
A little bit more than Forest County Potawatomi.
Yeah,
But
so,
it's- But they're so separated by the waters that,
yeah, it's difficult.
which used to be the main means of travel.
Right, and that's what's really unique about this area is it's connected to those water systems, and this was a huge trade route. And so there's so much archaeological information. It's such a valuable site. Any other questions?
In fact, did you have your hand up before? Okay.